Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, welcome to the energy stage for a session on people power, which is, after all, why we have energy, to empower people, and the role of community energy in enabling a decentralized energy system. And if that's all Greek to you at the moment, I hope it will become clearer as the session goes on. I am Duncan Law. I'm Policy and Advocacy Manager for Community Energy England. And we have three great speakers: Jonathan Atkinson, co-founder of the Carbon Co-op, Barbara Hammond, co-founder of Low Carbon Hub in Oxfordshire, and Jodie Giles, who is the Community Energy's Senior Project Manager at Regen. So the plan is that I will do a sort of scene setting at the beginning, and then each of those will talk for around 10 minutes, and then we'll have space and time for questions and discussion after that. So I've explained who I am. Community Energy England is the representative organisation of community energy groups in England, and to some extent heads up the policy work, the Westminster-facing policy work. We're also kind of knowledge sharing and connecting tissue. I suppose I should also explain what community energy is. Basically, it's people getting together in their local community to do energy in whatever form that takes. Often it historically has been installing renewable energy capacity based on the feed-in tariff and then using the profits for that to feed back into community benefit. But we've had a lot of squeezes recently, and so it's hugely diversified, an interesting portfolio of activity. Fundamentally, our mission at Community Energy England is putting people at the heart of the energy system. And it's very easy for them to be missing. We can easily become, and the government too, technology fetishists. The vision in 2014, the government's community energy strategy was 1 million homes powered by community energy by 2020. And here we are, and it ain't happened. And why? And the one word is government, or lack of. But it is recognised that at a very high level, at ministerial level, that community energy is vital. Claire Perry said community energy is a keystone of the government's ambition for a transition to the low-carbon, smart energy system. And they all say the future of energy is local. What they do with that, I think they're not quite sure, so we need to help them. And they do increasingly understand that this is a revolution, and you can't do that without taking the people with you. And community energy is a hugely important vector to taking the revolution to the people, or even the people leading the revolution. So community energy is hugely motivated and resilient despite all the setbacks. 94% of our organizations say climate change is absolutely fundamental. It's why they're doing what they're doing. But after that becomes community benefit and getting real benefit out of this transition. We're also very efficient. So for 2.3 million of development funding in 2018, which was our worst year ever, we leveraged 40 million of actual investment. As you can see, a lot of it loan stock, because the environment is increasingly difficult to get equity investment. And we're very good at returning benefit to our communities. So in that worst year ever, we returned nearly £1 million in the UK and in England and Wales to communities through community benefit funds, and more than £2 million in Scotland alone, which has a more friendly environment for community energy. And that's setting aside the material benefits that accrue from the community energy projects. Recently, South East London Community Energy calculated their social return on investment as 24 to 1. If you could get that return on investment anywhere else, come and tell me about it. But due to policy headwinds, which is, putting it politely, the removal of the feed-in tariff, the export tariff, tax relief, all sorts of setbacks, VAT, business rates and so on, we have had less growth than the sector promised at the beginning. So in our worst year ever, we saw an 84% reduction in new generation capacity, 79% decrease in annual investment value, 81% fewer new community energy groups, and 13% increase in stalled projects. So at the moment, we are frustrated, and there is with nowhere to go. So we have a huge wasted asset, hundreds of groups, thousands of volunteers with possibly hundreds of thousands of connections waiting and wanting to get involved in the energy transition and thwarted. All of this is contained in the Community Energy State of the Sector report. A new one will be coming out in May. Now we come on to the nub of the issue today, which is decentralised energy. What is it? Well, I'm probably teaching my grandmother here, but the old system was centralised, inefficient, usually fossil fuel generation, which was then fed through the transmission system and then distributed to the customers who paid the bills. Increasingly, as the minister's phrase, the future of energy is local, implies, energy will be generated much more locally on rooftops with small-scale CHP, small-scale wind, and then the flows of energy will be much more complex in two directions and much more at a local level, at the distribution level, much less of it coming down the pylons. So what are the implications of that? The phrases that are often used to describe the energy revolution is decarbonised, essential, decentralised, digitalised, smart. We will actually know what's flowing where and be able to control it. But the one that is increasingly being added, the fourth D, is democratised, involving the people with a stake in owning, controlling and evolving actively the system. The Net Zero report emphasises that without people being actively engaged, we simply will fail to realise our net zero target even by 2050, which is far too late. Partly because at least 62%, according to the Committee on Climate Change, of measures necessary to achieve that net zero target are dependent upon behaviour change. So we need to influence people to do energy and everything differently, and it doesn't really work top down, and currently there's no real strategy for that. Local is where it's at, I like to say, and if you think about it, so many things of the energy system are fundamentally local. People are local, they are the customers, the consumers. Heat has to be done locally, you can't store it or transport it. Efficiency tends to be to installations or buildings in a place where people are using them. Demand, obviously, engagement, that business of getting everybody actively involved in the system, is much better done face-to-face than through a government advertising campaign. Resilience is about connections and strong links, and mobility, most journeys are local. So there's actually a huge opportunity here, and local knowledge is what community energy, among other things, along with passion and local capital, can deliver, that enables us to do smart solutions around those opportunities. A list of some opportunities. So we need the public. Local climate emergencies, a lot of councils running around headlessly, not knowing really what to do about this challenge they've set themselves, and community energy is stepping in because they've had the answers for a long time. The district network operators are going to be transitioning into a system operation role, and local area energy planning, where the assets and the needs of the community are negotiated and supplied collaboratively, is the way forward, and is happening. And there's loads of money coming in for home energy efficiency. Challenges. Community energy can't find a business model except putting solar on occasional exceptional schools. We need support and especially for energy efficiency, where it's very difficult to take a profit margin on somebody being less in debt. Working with local authorities is always challenging. Incumbency, the big companies, the big suppliers, the DNOs even, and the lack of engagement with energy. The latest news, and this is my penultimate slide, I think. There's some good news. This government, if you believe them, has committed to colossal investments in making this country the cleanest, greenest on earth with the most far-reaching environmental program. But they have committed 9.2 billion to home energy efficiency, and we'll learn more on the 11th of March. The government on Monday recommitted to subsidising or supporting onshore wind and solar. And in the consultation document attached, there is reference to the importance of community. Delivering net zero will require change across the whole of society. Music to our ears. And that's a list of some of the landmarks coming up that we will learn more and have to negotiate, and need community energy and people to be featuring centrally in. Just a glimpse of some of the projects that community energy has been involved in. School solar at the top, which is fundamental to getting the young people engaged and knowledgeable about how energy is central to their lives. Energy gardens, putting renewable energy and gardens on overground stations and building community around that. Lots of community wind. There is a 90-year-old lady looking lovingly at her smart meter, an engagement you don't see every day, but as a result of Project Leo, connecting people up and giving them benefit from the community energy installed around them. Community hydro, and then other hugely innovative projects around local supply, and one of the most striking is riding sunbeams, community energy feeding directly into rail traction. 10% of our railways could be powered by community energy. Think about that. Putting people at the heart of the energy system where they really ought to be, and giving us a chance of achieving this transition. Thank you. That's the background. I'm now going to introduce our first speaker, who, in honouring the energy hierarchy, which energy efficiency should always be at the top of, I'm going to invite Jonathan Atkinson, co-founder of the Carbon Co-op, to present to us. Jonathan's an environmental campaigner and co-founder of the Carbon Co-op, which delivers energy efficiency services and whole house retrofit to homes around Greater Manchester and, I believe, now across the UK, and is leading people-powered retrofit. What a great name. Developing end-to-end householder service and a supply chain for deep retrofit. Jonathan.
Thanks very much. Yeah, really nice to be here today. Hope you've been enjoying the show. My name's Jonathan Atkinson. I'm from the Carbon Co-op. We're based in Greater Manchester. And just to give you an idea of our size and scale, we've got 13 members of staff, paid staff. We've got 220 members of our organisation. I'll talk a little bit about what a member is of Carbon Co-op. Yeah, and we work mostly in the Northwest, but also around the UK and sometimes around Europe as well. Just a quick show of hands. Who here is a member of a community energy group? Do we have any members? We have a few. We have a smattering. Fantastic. And also, in terms, I'm going to be talking about retrofit and energy efficiency. Does anyone work in that sector? Either, supply chain, consultants? We've got a few people, but maybe people from other bits of the sector. So I'll contextualize a little bit retrofit and what it means to us. Yeah, thanks very much for the introduction. We're going to be each giving a little different perspective on the future of community energy in the UK. And my particular focus will be on retrofit and energy efficiency. And my take on it is that we need a service-based approach from community energy to retrofit. And I'm going to unpack that and explain a little bit about what that means, and also some of the kind of unique kind of selling points that community energy can bring to this sector that can maybe fix some market failures. We'll see. So the Carbon Co-op, yeah, we're a community energy organisation, as discussed, a community benefit society, so not-for-profit, legally by our governance structure. Members join Carbon Co-op to access services, basically, technical expertise, trusted contractors, finance opportunities. But the key thing that we do is create a community of interest, people that are committed together to retrofitting their homes, to making big savings in their energy efficiency, in their energy usage, to cut their carbon emissions. And we create a community of interest where people can share experiences and expertise, come along to socials, contribute to blogs and information and knowledge sharing, all about peer learning and peer sharing information and knowledge. We work mostly in energy efficiency, but we do, and Jody, one of the other speakers, may briefly mention it, we have some work in the smart energy systems field, and increasingly in kind of data management and data cooperative things as well. But this is a selection of our members. We've helped them in different ways. So for those of you who aren't familiar with retrofit, retrofit is retrospectively fitting energy efficiency improvements to existing homes. So we might be able to build new energy, low energy homes. That's fantastic, that's great. But we also have a huge 27 million homes out there at the moment that if we're going to meet our climate change targets, they all need improving in terms of the energy performance. So we retrospectively fit energy efficiency improvements, mostly in the field of insulation, walls, ceiling, floors, but also things like triple glazed windows, new heating systems, solar panels, that sort of thing. So, and our role in that is one of awareness raising and what have you, and that's fantastic, but we also get involved in service delivery. So we're doing assessments for people, and we're actually doing contracting for people sometimes as well. So it's actual delivery of these services. So there's a little bit of a pointer to this in the intro, but why aren't we all retrofitting our homes? This process makes our homes more comfortable, greener. It can improve the health, the environment, the indoor environment quality, air quality. So why aren't we doing more of it? Well, government interventions in this area just simply failed to date. Many may have heard of the Green Deal, the policy intervention 7-8 years ago by the coalition government. Unfortunately, that crashed and burned. And since then, there's been a bit of a black hole in this area. Why is that? From our point of view, our analysis, interventions in this area have been too top-down and taken a one-size-fits-all approach. We know from our interaction with householders, every home is different, every householder is different. So why design an intervention or a program that just treats everyone the same? Often, government will be using large companies, multinationals, and they're often not the people trusted by householders to come through their doors, at least not in the first instance. And too often, government policies in this area have prioritised financial considerations over carbon, quality, and indeed safety as well. What we would contend is that community energy organisations, locally based, locally rooted, not-for-profit, owned and controlled by their members, are more trusted, they're more local, they're more accountable, and in this sense, they have a competitive advantage, really, over these larger companies. Would you trust a company that's come from 200-300 miles away, or one that's based down the road? Would you trust a slick sales routine or a recommendation from a friend and neighbour, word of mouth? We would contend that it's the latter in those cases. So, we've been going for over 10 years now, and we've been developing a series of services and activities. But our most recent project has been talked about is people-powered retrofit. Now, we are one of 5 BEIS local retrofit supply chain pilots that are going on around the country. And we're the most northerly by about 200 miles. Now, these started in November 18. There's not a lot of publicity about them, but you will hear a little bit from Barbara, perhaps, about the one in Oxford. But these have been going for just over, well, nearly 18 months now, and they've got another year to run. And they're interventions in local areas that look to develop supply chain and demand around retrofit. And our idea around people-powered retrofit is all around basically exploiting those competitive advantages that I've talked about local, trusted, and accountability, and very much focused on the service delivery and the householder. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the aspects of people-powered retrofit. I think, for me personally, one of the beauties of people-powered retrofit is a focus on local supply and local demand, and bringing those two things together. Because too often, one of the barriers to householders commissioning retrofit is a lack of supply. And there are many, many barriers that local supply chain face as well. If you can develop the two of them together, you have an effective market there. And we've got two maps here. One on the left-hand side is around contractors, and the one on the right-hand side is a data mapping exercise we carried out as part of people-powered retrofit, where we looked about where the types of people likely to procure retrofit were located. And what you find in both these instances is a local aspect to that. Obviously, supply chain is tiered, basically. Some people work very locally, some people work across a broader sector. But what you do tend to find is a match and an overlay there, that if you can focus retrofit demand in one area, you can bring the supply chain there. It's co-located, you can get economies of scale, and you also get an advantage around marketing, which I'll talk about as well. So that's one of the underpinning kind of aspects of people-powered retrofit, is around the local supply and demand. A lot of people that I talk to are amazed that with Carbon Co-op we have no problem whatsoever in finding householders. In fact, our biggest problem is trying to keep a lid on their expectations. And one of the reasons for our success is our community-based social marketing approach to this. And community-based social marketing is particularly prevalent in areas such as health. It's well used in the States in energy efficiency terms in rolling out programs. And they're basically campaigns that involve collaboration with a broad base of local influencers and trusted partners within a localized target area. What that means in reality is you're working with institutions, community champions, trusted organizations, local authorities, public health, to bring together a message and to propagate that message. I think I have, unfortunately, a picture missing here, but the kind of way that we run a social marketing campaign is using things like social media, yes, but also we have home energy parties that run in people's homes. We have socials and community-based training programs. We have all sorts of things. And this is a really effective way at creating demand in a specific area. It's around creating trusted people that pass on leads to each other, and it really builds a demand in a certain area. So we have that social marketing approach, and we have local supply and demand coming together. We also have a very fixed focus on service design, and I think this is an area, 2 minutes, yeah, no problem. This is an area where community energy, traditionally we work on a project-by-project basis, but it's really about orientating around service design and service delivery. And in this sense, it's using the cutting edge in terms of service design. It's bringing together householders here and contractors to design the service that works for everyone. People-powered retrofit is an end-to-end service. You may not be able to read this, but it starts with advice at the top. Then there's an assessment. We bring in some design development. It moves on to retrofit coordination on site. And then it's quality assurance that take place on site as well. So it's taking someone through the whole chain here from end to end. And particularly some of the projects that we've looked at in the United States are very good at this sort of thing. And it's a very effective way to roll out a service. just to highlight some of the people involved with this, it's about bringing together different technical partners and staff members in this. We have project managers and retrofit advisors and retrofit coordinators are really key part of this. But we also have a lot of ICT development, internet tools going on in the background. Jody might mention this, but we've been able to link into the smart meter network, which means that householders can gain access on a half-hourly granularity to their gas and electricity, which is fantastic in terms of monitoring and evaluating the impact of the work done. So those are the things we bring together within people-powered retrofit. It's in a pilot stage at the moment. We've got 50 clients onboarded into the service, and the next year is really going to see it grow and take off, which is quite exciting. In terms of lessons for the sector, for me, it's about integrating high-quality technical expertise. We work very closely with Urbed, who are our technical partners, who have architectural and retrofit expertise in this area. It's about taking a service design and delivery approach and being really focused on the needs of the householder. And for the sector, such as community energy, it's about moving away from predominantly voluntary organisations to a more professionalised approach. And that's bringing it together. Hopefully, when you bring these things together, we can see a localised approach to energy efficiency all around the UK. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Picture of the scale, 27 million homes, but really emphasise that trust is fundamental. We've got to get this right first time. We can't afford to go pear-shaped. Our next speaker is Barbara Hammond, who's had a 25-year career in sustainable development and energy, including working in local, central government, the private sector and academia, and is a founder of amazing organisations, the Low Carbon Hub, West Oxford Community Renewables and Osney Lock Hydro, who've raised more than £10 million for community-owned solar and hydro projects. And she is an MBE. Barbara.
Thank you. That must mean that community energy is establishment now. I had brought some stuff to talk to you about later on, but there are too many people. We've got about twice as many people as I thought there would be. So these will be here for you to pick up afterwards, and I'll talk to you about them at the end of my few slides. So I'm not going to talk to you all about the Low Carbon Hub, fascinating though my organisation is. I'm going to spend most of the time talking about Project LEO. LEO stands for Local Energy Oxfordshire, and it is one of the government's Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund smart energy demonstrators, of which there are 4 in the country. We've got 2 in Oxfordshire, one which is a humongous great battery, which isn't Project LEO, and then Project LEO, which is all about how you operate at the grid edge to turn a very centralised fossil-based energy system into a very decentralised renewables-based system. And if ever any of you go on the train from London to Oxford, you will have seen the cooling towers at Didcot Power Station, which are emblematic of that energy system. Those cooling towers have now disappeared. They've been blown up. And we are deep in Oxfordshire into the reality of what it means to change that energy system, therefore. And we've calculated in Oxfordshire that the resulting low-carbon economy is going to, by 2030, create another multi-hundred million pound investment in the local economy, and another 80,000 jobs in the local economy to replace the 400 jobs that there used to be at Didcot Power Station. So we think it's a complete no-brainer for all sorts of reasons to make this change. Project LEO is a partnership of many organisations. It is led by Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, who is our distribution network operator, and it's part of their work on how they turn themselves into a distribution system operator and a neutral market facilitator. We think it's pretty amazing that SSEN decided that they would come into this partnership and indeed lead it. And we think it's a testament to the ecosystem that we have grown in Oxfordshire over the last 10 to 15 years between local authorities, researchers and academics, the private sector and community groups across the county. You'll see that there we are as the Low Carbon Hub, a social enterprise in a £40 million 3-year flagship government programme, along with all of these amazing partners. And I'm making the bold statement to you, and you can quiz me on it later if you want to. If it wasn't for the Low Carbon Hub, that project bid would not have come together in the 3 months that we had to do it. It's because we can convene that local ecosystem to make those local partnerships happen that these amazing projects come about. So what are we trying to do in Project Leo? We are trying to demonstrate how you can balance the grid at a very local level, at the grid edge, and how you can earn money for doing that by being paid for providing flexibility services to the distribution system at the most local level. We're just coming to the end of the first year of this project, and we have done some first market trials of that sort of system. So we're running a whole series of market games on how that local market would work, and we're asking people who come along to those market games to test them to breaking point so that we can find out where people can start gaming those markets in a way that might not be good for the rest of us. So that unlike, say, Twitter, starting without doing that sort of market testing, has become the difficult web service that we know that it is. We want the local energy system of the future to be designed in a way that's foreseen those problems and is therefore accessible to and beneficial to absolutely everybody. Because we all know that if we're going to achieve zero carbon, it's not net zero, it is zero carbon as soon as possible, we're going to have to involve and benefit absolutely everyone. We can't leave anyone behind. This has to be a market that everyone can take part in, no matter what the amount of asset they've got or not to bring into that. So what have we done? We're working to a system we call minimum viable system, where we're running trials and refining them. We're going round and round. We're getting the minimum number of people and organizations together to run those trials. We're running them, we're learning, we're running them again, we're learning, we're running them again, we're learning. So the first one we did was here at the Oxford Bus Company, where we have a solar array, and there is also a battery there. And the bus company is making the change over time to hybrid electric buses, and they've also got a fully electric fleet on the way. So they really want to know, and so does the DNO really want to know, how to accommodate that sort of fast charging of great big things like buses on the system. And we're starting with a little 50 kilowatt battery and a little 150 kilowatt solar array to see if you turn the battery down, whether you can do that as a signal from the DSO, what steps there are in that process, how you verify that that service was delivered, and how you then pay for that service. And so that was just an hour of turning a battery down. And we have the readout to show that that actually happened. And that was also being monitored at the local substation. So the next thing that we've got to know is whether that registered at all at the local substation for the DSO to know that that actually delivered a service that was useful to it. We have actually been paid for that service, a whole Smartie. And we need to be ramping up over time to work out how to do that. Another one we've done is at the Sackler Library in Oxford, one of the Oxford University estate buildings. And that was about turning down the heating. Would clients of the library notice if you just turned down the heating for an hour? And if you turn down the heating for an hour, what effect does that have then on the cooling system? And interestingly enough, that was going to turn the cooling system on. I can't remember quite why that was. So we've run that trial. None of the users of the library complained. Now we can try doing that for a longer period. The third one we've done was at Sandford Hydro, which is a big run-of-river hydro that we own as the low-carbon hub. And what we were trying to do there was to dispatch extra generation from the hydro project on the basis that we want over time to prove how you can use the river itself as the battery. So holding up a little bit of water, a few inches over a couple of miles, and then running that through. As you can see, this was an example where we failed to dispatch because the trial was timed just as we'd got mega rain. There was too much water in the river and the head was really low, and so we couldn't open the gates in those conditions. But we actually learned as much out of that trial as we learned from the other two, because it was, so what happens if you've got a contract to deliver energy and you fail to do that? What's the sanction there? What does the DSO need to do to back up that situation? How can we run these trials? I mean, all of these trials we've done, just hasten to add, in a way that is keeping the distribution network itself safe. But over the course of the project, we're going to be getting into a live situation where we could actually cause some problems to the grid. And this one showed us how easy it would be for that to happen. Oops. Alongside those early trials, we have been, and the market games that I was talking about, we've also been working with the DNO on what the grid looks like in Oxfordshire. And it is quite interesting to find how little information that's easily mappable they have. And it's all in spreadsheet lists and numbers and very techy, not visual for someone like me. So it's taken us a while to turn what they know into the map. For any of you who know Oxfordshire, you'll know that there's been a bit cut off at the top, and that's because that's the WPD area. This is showing the SSEN area in the county. This is showing the 62 primary substations. And we've been running a site selection set of workshops to work out which of our assets and which primary substations we're going to work with to do much bigger market trials over the rest of the project. The thing that is sort of interesting for us as a community energy organisation is when we start looking at those primary substations alongside the community energy groups that we have in Oxfordshire. So we have 26 community energy shareholders of the Low Carbon Hub KIC, and quite a few of those map quite well onto those primary substation areas. So could we get into a situation where the community knows what's happening in real time at its primary substation and is working with a whole load of assets and households to provide services that benefit the people in that area? Who knows? It's early days yet. But as one of my colleagues there will know, up here we have a nice pink bit called Deddington, where he lives, and we're in the process of developing a new solar farm there. It's an off-gas community. Wouldn't it be interesting to see how you might link up that solar farm with that community? Those are the sorts of smart and fair project trials that we as the Low Carbon Hub are going to be leading on for the next couple of years. We started off with the idea that they would be smart neighbourhood trials, and very quickly in the course of the project, we realised that we needed to put very strongly that fair into the title, and we needed to stick our elbows out very strongly with our partners to be saying, look, we need to think about the people here. We need to keep the people safe here. We need to provide benefits to real people. Don't just see them as lab rats, because you'll turn everyone off, you'll lose the trust, and we will get nowhere with this. As you might expect, we're getting a bit of interest in the project. This was a visit that the then House of Commons Science and Technology Committee made to Oseney Lock Hydro, which is one of the projects that I'm involved in voluntarily, and which is also going to take part in the using the river as a battery project. And this set of aspects of the project give you a sense of what we're trying to cover, and if any of you want to talk to me about any of this later, please do. The takeaways I've got, if anybody would like to take them away, is a nice picture of Sanford Hydro. This is the project that made SSEN realise that it was going to be worth talking to a little community energy social enterprise, because it's a 440 kilowatt hydro project on the Thames, and they had separately, completely independently of us, drawn a diagram in their strategy document about becoming a DSO that had a hydro as a central project in a peer-to-peer local neighbourhood network project. It really made them sit up and take note. It's the reason why this project actually happened. And one of the interesting things about it, I think, is that we're getting the Environment Agency involved in this, which is another great big non-departmental public body. So they're letting us automate 2 of their own gates on the weir so that we can operate the hydro more flexibly. That's an amazing thing for community energy to manage to do after 10 or so years of operation. And what we're trying to do over time, other takeaway, is develop Oxfordshire into a single people's power station, where we are proving how we are meeting the energy needs of the county from assets that we have in the county. In Oxfordshire, that means it's going to be mainly solar, because we've done a little bit of wind and we've done most of the hydro we've got. And we've got 2 massive AD plants fed from curbside food waste. So how do you make an energy system that's mainly solar when a lot of the problem is heat in the winter and a shed load of large transport, freight and buses? We think we can do it. The kit's certainly there. As ever, it's about the people and the governance systems and the financing of that. And then the third and final takeaway, if you should want it, is our equivalent of Jonathan's people-powered retrofit that we have called Cozy Homes Oxfordshire, because we think people don't respond very well to retrofit. They like to think about their home being cozy. It's a bit Marmite, which is quite good because people react to it. This is the postcard about suppliers getting involved. We've got exactly the same issue as Jonathan in Oxfordshire, where the good contractors have an order book that's overflowing, trying to get them involved in, and we can recruit as many households as you want. That's not difficult for us in our communities. Getting the contractors to work nicely together in a consortium that delivers the whole house retrofit is not easy. But we're going to have to do all of those things along with Project Leo Learning if we are going to get to net zero carbon. Sorry, zero carbon, not net zero. And the final thing I'm going to do, and this is a really shameless plug, I'm sorry about this, Duncan, if you disapprove, I'm going to show you on my phone where our pledging is at for our current share offer. Please go to www.lowcarbonhub.org/invest, make your pledge and start making the future of energy in the UK properly people-powered. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. So yes, wonderful view of community energy leading system innovation in the electricity system, and also the power of convening and safeguarding and bringing benefit to the local community. Very inspiring. Thank you, Barbara. Our final speaker is Jodie Giles, who is a senior project manager at Regen, responsible for community energy, an expert on local supply, flexibility, new community energy business models, and stakeholder facilitation, with particular experience around innovation and business models for local energy. Jodie. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, does anybody not quite understand balancing and flexibility? Few.
Can you put your hand up here if you really know what flexibility is? Great, okay. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Thanks, Duncan. And thanks for having me at Future Build. It's very exciting to be invited to talk here today. I've been asked to talk to you about innovation and how our energy system is evolving. And that's a subject very close to my heart because I've spent many years trying to help community organisations across the country do innovation projects, and I've been involved in many innovation projects at the organisation that I work at, Regen. We're an independent and mission-led organisation, and we're trying to transform our energy system to make it more democratic, decarbonised and decentralised. And as part of that organisation, I get to work on really, really fascinating projects like Power to Participate. And this is a project that we worked on over the last 2 years, trying to help communities across the country understand why flexibility might be relevant to them, and also lobbying BEIS and Ofgem and all of the distribution network operators in the country to make that new market much more accessible for communities so they could actually take part, get some of the value from it. We also wrote a few years ago a guide on options for selling your energy locally. This is like the holy grail for community energy organisations. How do we get our power from our hydro or our wind or our solar directly to our local community and sell it to them directly? And that's really challenging in this country, and I'll talk a little bit about that more. So we talk quite a lot about the system, and the subject I was asked to talk about is how the system's evolving. And my short answer to that really is that it isn't. This system that we've got, you know, we've talked about this a lot, being very linear, very top-down, big fossil fuel power generation through transmission lines down to the distribution network and into homes and businesses. And most of that system was installed between the time that my granny and my parents were born. It's not very smart, it's not very digital. And because in the last 20 years we've seen a lot more distributed energy coming onto that system in the form of wind and hydro and solar mainly, and a few batteries, it gets a lot more messy, it's a lot more web-like. We don't really know what's going on that system, as Barbara pointed out. You know, the distribution system operators don't have, they do have some data on what's going on, but they can't really control those data flows very well. And the problem with this is that this system is built for peak capacity. So we need that system to be able to cope with the sort of highest demand that we have as users. And there's a gap there between what we're actually using most of the time and what the peak that we need to use between 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the evening when we get home from work is. And if we can use that capacity more effectively and more flexibly, we can save ourselves some money. And that's not to say we don't need to reinforce the network as well, because we absolutely do. And that's one of the big things we think about a lot at Regen, is how do we close that really big looming capacity gap? Because at the minute, we're in one of the areas, we're based in Exeter, we work a lot with people in our region, we work nationally as well, but we've spent many years working with communities on our doorstep who can't connect to the network because essentially it's full. And they've got to pay for that connection and all of the upstream reinforcements. So the people who want to connect nuclear power stations can connect for free, but if you want to connect to a community solar farm, you've got to pay millions of pounds for reinforcement, and that makes it unviable instantly. You know, the Committee on Climate Change have said we've got to quadruple the amount of renewables we need, or we've got installed already by 2050 to meet our zero carbon targets. And at the minute, we just simply can't get enough connections back onto that network to supply the energy at all. So that's a really, really, really big challenge. Lots of barriers to local supply, mainly regulatory, and government policy, Duncan pointed out, is a really big problem for us because it's just been systematically decimating the business model for community energy. And there's a lot of distortion of market economics in energy as well. So if you think about our fossil fuel generation, we have the highest tax breaks in Europe for fossil fuels, and currently no subsidy at all, no support for onshore wind, which is the cheapest form of energy generation we have, or large solar. And we're really pleased that the government, as Duncan pointed out, has said that it's going to look into re-establishing some support for those two technologies this week. But that still doesn't overcome the planning barrier that we have, which is there's an effective moratorium on onshore wind in England. You can do it in Scotland and Wales, and they have much more supportive planning environments. So what does all this mean for community energy and innovation? Well, all of those problems mean it's really, really hard to do the standard projects of install some generation, make some profit, put all that money back into your local community and do really great stuff and address fuel poverty and put solar panels on your community hall or whatever you want to do with that that's going to feed back into that local virtuous cycle of the local economy and doing the right thing. If you can't do that, you've got to think, okay, what am I going to do? I can either do some energy efficiency projects, absolutely great if you want to do that. I can give up and go home. You're probably not going to do that if you're very highly motivated by addressing social and environmental fairness and inequality. And the other option is you can think, okay, how am I going to innovate? And the reason why communities are so important in innovation is because, like my colleagues before me have mentioned, communities are early adopters. And community energy organisations in particular are the people who are going to influence their friends and neighbours, which Jonathan and Barbara have both talked about. They're the sort of people who will be going into people's homes anyway and are trusted locally. And interestingly, in the Bayes Public Opinion Tracker poll of 2019, less than 50% of people in the UK said they trust their energy supplier. So we really are going to have to think about how we're going to reach everyone, because if we're going to achieve the level and scale of change that we need to achieve in this country to reach net zero, we're going to have that trust. And that's a key value thing about community energy. I've talked about the social and environmental motivation over profit. That's not to say that community energy can't be profitable, because it can, and it absolutely should stand up financially. But the key thing here is that it's not motivated purely by profit. And that means that communities are very good at kind of acting as a social and environmental conscience for an energy industry that's completely ruled and governed by incumbents. So one way that communities do this, for instance, is they will object to things. So in my local town, and I'm on the board of a community energy organisation, and we had an application for a gas-fired power station to address flexibility needs in our local area. And we said, hold on a minute, we've got a 2050 target for zero carbon, and you tell us that you want to install a gas-fired power station to meet our peak demand. And we don't want that to happen. We started a petition, we got over 2,000 signatures in a week. We got the planning application overturned 9-1. In favour of the community and against this gas-fired power station, and now we're looking into the alternatives, which we would prefer. So a massive solar farm, huge solar farm, with some batteries and some EV charging stations. And that's all important because that's community saying, this isn't right, guys, this isn't okay what's going on in this energy system. We want it to be different, and our alternative is whatever it is. It's not just to say that all of community energy is about engagement and trust, because it isn't. There are technical partners out there and technical organisations like Carbon Co-op doing some really amazing work, and I'm going to come on to that next. So these are some of the organisations doing technical projects on demand-side response at the minute under the government-funded domestic demand-side response demonstrator trials. So with Carbon Co-op, they're looking at the potential for communities to act as an aggregator, so pooling together small amounts of flexibility from households and clubbing that together and selling it to the network because they have a need for people to turn off power at particular times of day. Bath and West are doing this with applications looking at solar PV on households and battery storage, and also hot water heating systems, and using apps to control that. Repowering are doing this with Moixa, a battery installer, and a couple of other partners in London. And they're basically saying, we'll do all the engagement because we're in those households anyway, talking to people about switching, talking to people about draft proofing, talking to people about fuel poverty. So we've already addressed a lot of that cost. With the Open DSR trial, the Carbon Co-op trial that I'm working on with Carbon Co-op, this model is really about installing smart controls on immersion heaters and smart electric car charging in people's homes. And we're doing 100 homes, and we're automatically controlling when those immersion heaters are topped up and when those cars are charged, and trying to switch on and switch off that demand at different times of day to work out whether we can actually physically do that. And Carbon Co-op have a whole team of software developers working on the software to achieve this. And they're saying basically, because we're a community-motivated organisation, we'd rather do that ourselves than get an aggregator who are going to take some of the profit from that. And we're just going to get on with it ourselves. So a real appetite there to upskill and become much more involved in the technology and professionalise as a sector. There's an option for them to sell that flexibility to the local distribution network, and everyone is going to need a smart meter to be able to do this because the metering costs are quite high. And they're also doing that thing that Repowering are doing, where they're going into people's homes and not just talking about flexibility, they're talking about whole house retrofit, talking about switching, talking about every other issue that people have with their energy. And so that kind of creates an economy of scale and helps the model stack up, because if you're going to save £10 a year by letting someone control your immersion heater, that's probably not enough on your own to have a conversation about. The other option is we could sell some of that through a tier 1 aggregator, a commercial aggregator, and then play into the national flexibility markets, get some revenue that way. On a different level of innovation, Barbara talked about this in terms of the ability of community organisations to convene. And I've been working with this group of community energy organisations in Devon for about 8 years now. We've got 23 community energy organisations who all did very small projects on church halls and roofs and schools, and it was really hard, it was really tough. And then the government came along and changed everything, and those models on their own didn't really stack up because they hadn't achieved an economy of scale. Those organisations have now set up one organisation as a community developer. They've got a pipeline of 100 megawatts of solar. They're talking to landowners who don't normally talk to solar developers, but in this instance will, because they're a community organisation. And they've also done a huge amount of work brokering relationships with all of the public bodies in Devon. And essentially, the problem with the business model is that there's no one to buy your electricity from your solar farm now unless you've got a power purchase agreement. We're saying, okay, if you look at the social and environmental value you get from community energy and build that into your procurement process, or we create a new financial mechanism to enable you to buy our power, which is community and locally owned, then will you buy it from us for 20 years? And so we're in the process of doing that at the minute, and it's looking pretty good. So we're really hopeful for that model, the Devon model. And ultimately, I want to come back to this point about transformation, the system transformation. It isn't possible to transform a massive system like the energy system without bringing people with us. This can't be done to people, it has to be done with people. Everyone is going to have to participate in this change. And I want to leave you with a little poem. The title to this poem is that a partially submerged man in Somerset considers the possibility of investing in locally owned renewable generation to offset the mitigate and to it's a really long title for a really short poem, to combat and mitigate the damaging effects of climate change. And the poem is, I want to go renewable so my streets are less canoeable. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Hugely inspiring. While we sort ourselves out on these chairs, would you take 2 minutes to turn to your neighbour and discuss what came up for you out of these four presentations, and if there are any things you need clarification on or questions that arise. So, 2 minutes. Sorry to interrupt productive conversations. We've got only until 1:45, so we've got about 15 minutes. We like to be guided by the science, and the science says that if we take a question from a woman first, we end up getting a more representative sample of contributions from the audience. So I'm inviting a woman to ask the first question. The lady in the purple jacket there would like to ask our first question. Thank you. And I'm going to take 3 questions so that the audience, so that the panel can choose what they want to answer.
Hello, I'm Frances Williamson from Chameleon Technology. We manufacture and produce the in-home displays as part of the smart meter rollout. And it was actually an old lady looking at an in-home display, not a smart meter earlier, just to put that out there. And obviously we're part of the whole smart metering system, and we have a data cloud platform that tries to aggregate real-time energy data and provide insights and information to customers to empower them to make decisions based on fact, as opposed to just assumptions on how their building is working, etc. And thank you very much to all 3 panelists for their talks, and it's very inspiring and encouraging to hear about what you're doing. However, and I'm sure you guys have been in these situations over the past decades and heard of similar trials that have, hopefully there's a kind of momentum now that's happening. But do you really think we're going to get to where we need to be by the time we need to be there? And if not, what do we as a nation need to do, and when I say we, I kind of mean government, to actually push this and escalate it to get the capacity that's necessary to the tipping point to actually achieve it, if that's a question?
It is, thank you. The gentleman behind.
Hello, my name is Gio Morin. I'm a customer of Ecotricity. I would like to know, how long does it take for a wind turbine to pay for itself?
Good afternoon. My name's John Richardson. The question I have got is, can you hear me? Yeah. The question I have is this: how much pounds needs to be invested to save a ton of carbon using the people power, the role of the community model, and do you think you'll be able to achieve, by using this process, zero carbon by 2050?
Was that energy energy efficiency or renewable? What? Sorry.
Everything.
So that's a question about will we get there on time, and if not, what the government should do to help us get there. Question about how long does it take for wind turbine to pay off, and how much does it cost to save a ton of carbon?
Shall I do the net zero policy one and try and do the wind turbine one?
Could we just agree that we're talking about zero, not net zero, please? I don't know.
Yeah, we can agree that.
And we can't net off with anyone else. We can't net off with the developing world. We can't net off with future generations. We have to be to zero carbon.
Okay, so getting to zero carbon by 2050, what do we need to do to achieve that? With the government we've got, quite frankly, I'm not sure how that's going to be possible, because the biggest barrier we have is a political barrier. We all need to take action. It's not just the government's responsibility, and that's why I work with communities, because communities have been getting on with this for years despite government policy. And if you think about kind of massive system change in history, the Industrial Revolution or wars or emergencies that we've had in the past, people do have the capacity to change things if they want to, but that has to be people-led, and it has to be people-focused, and people have to be at the centre of that change. And so that's why I'm committed to working on community energy. In terms of how long it takes a wind turbine to pay back, I'm not exactly sure on the answer to that, but I can tell you how much it costs per unit of electricity generated. And onshore wind at the minute is around £30 a megawatt hour. Offshore wind is around £53 per megawatt hour. Nuclear is around £96 per megawatt hour. And that's according to the government's levelised cost of energy figures. So onshore wind is by far the cheapest form of energy, and we can't yet do it because we have a government ban on planning. So one thing we could do is get the government to lift that ban on the planning.
Can I just follow on from that? I've spent a long time working with governments. I'm actually older than I think I am most of the time. So I was actually running the UK renewable energy programs when the large-scale PV trials were being done, when we were doing the first offshore wind projects. And it was one of the absolute pleasures of my life after doing that job in the early 2000s to having offshore wind projects smashing the bids for getting them built all over the place. And it's an amazing difference over a working lifetime. So I'm absolutely convinced that we can do these things. We know all the technology is there. We know how to connect it up. We know how to pay for it. We know that it's better than nuclear. We know that it's tons better than fossil, because we won't have to keep on mopping up the problems that it causes. The thing that we haven't convinced ourselves to do yet is to change all of the 10,000 pages of rules about how the energy system works. And the people who are going to make that change happen is every single one of us, because the thing that I have learned over many years of working now is that governments follow. They don't lead, they follow. Do not elect the people that you do not want to be there. And whoever is elected, whether your vote counted towards them or not, get on their case. They are the people who will follow you. People-powered change, guys. It's the only way.
Yeah, sounds very good. I agree with that. In terms of the targets, I would sort of come to what the Tyndall Centre. I would copy what their line, which is to worry less about when we will achieve these figures around zero carbon, and think more about the next 5 years and what we're going to do in the next 5 years, and focused action in that kind of time scale, because we're spending a hell of a lot of time banding around different dates, different quantifications, different metrics basically, and I think for me, the biggest thing is the Treasury Green Book and how it quantifies and values cost-benefit analysis on things such as retrofit, which is seen as like a cost, not a benefit, and carbon, which doesn't really come into it. And in terms of cost, how you quantify cost for retrofit can be done in all kinds of different ways, from net present value to effective spend. What I would just simplify by saying the average cost that through our projects demonstrated, and other organisations have as well, to bring a house down to the kinds of levels we need to be at for a net zero future is around a £40,000 spend for a whole house deep retrofit. In the time when eco could be applied in the way it should be applied, which is more broadly, we were selling carbon around £115, £120 per tonne. Now I something like 30 is just worthless, unfortunately, and that's due to the sabotage of that market by the energy suppliers. So that is another kind of a focus for political energies, I think.
I think we sort of need to get back to the first question there, what we need to do. I'm a bit worried at the moment about how difficult it feels to government to do deep retrofit everywhere, because it's been a bit rubbish in maintaining policy to do that. And it's been equally rubbish over many governments now in making our construction industry do what it should do. There are all sorts of reasons for that. Let's not go into them. But I'm starting to hear people sort of bypassing the whole retrofit question by talking about massive oversupply of renewable energy and massive grid to transport it all over the place, which really plays into the big investment, big investor, international money way of doing things. And I think that we have to really work very hard, as people here are doing, and I'm sure people, to be demonstrating how working at that most local level behind the primary, if not the secondary substations, to balance, which means really deep retrofitting, which means then renewable supply of energy, and balancing before you've even really hit the transmission system. We need to develop those models really early, otherwise this other way of doing things is going to overtake. And I find that deeply scary, because that sort of money doesn't care about geography. So I really hope that the demonstrations that we're all doing make a difference, and the sorts of technologies that you're working with, showing people in real households what's happening in a way that's accessible to them, is deeply important.
Thank you. Just add, from my reading, carbon payback or carbon debt on wind is between 1 and 3 years. We do have to think about it, because that is embodied carbon, that is carbon that is out there up front, but it's still the best thing we can be doing. Just in terms of people, the reason I live where I live 30 years later is because I got involved in my community and worked with amazing people on solutionist projects. And even if we do end up sliding down the slippery slope, if we slide down with a resilient community, there's going to be an awful lot less nastiness and an awful lot more cooperation in solving the problems immediately in front of us. So people are absolutely key to this. We must win this, but people are the front line. Next 3 questions. Gentleman back there. And I'd love to see another woman's hand up after him.
Stuart Boothman from Just Transition Wakefield. Is that loud enough? Can you hear? Yeah. Our local authority is about to start to create 2 large solar farms, one at each end of the district. Is that a potential mechanism for community generation to feed into, rather than having to negotiate all of that themselves?
One zero carbon fuel that we haven't talked about yet is hydrogen. there is a hydrogen hub in Oxfordshire, Wiltshire, and Barbara, I wonder if the low carbon hub you're involved in has been talking to the hydrogen hub, and secondly, whether you've looked at the use of hydrogen from wind power when they overproduce. This happens in northern Norway, which has a lot of hydroelectric and not many people, so they produce hydrogen there. And one of the problems we have in trying to do this in the UK is that the electricity producers will not sell the electricity that they waste at a lower price to hydrogen producers. And I wonder how we solve that one.
Is there a woman who would like to ask a question? Yes, there is. Thank you.
I think we've covered a bit of this already, but I'd just like to bring it back to the climate emergency declarations that everyone's been mentioning today. What role do communities and community energy projects have to play in realising climate emergency declarations?
Brilliant. So that was local authority solar projects. How can they link up and empower communities? Hydrogen and climate. How do we interface with climate emergencies?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a key part of delivery, and I think we're a window into the future. I think our members are doing the kind of things that more people need to do, and we can be willing partners for local authorities. I think there are cultural differences between community energy and municipalities, and they can work together, really, the scale and the agility and the impact. I think hydrogen, we need hydrogen desperately for industrialized heat, yeah? We desperately need as much hydrogen as possible, otherwise there's no other routes. We do not need it in our domestic properties, and it is being pushed by the gas industry as a way to promulgate their industry, so it's quite dangerous.
Shall I go next? There's a really, really great set of questions. Local authority solar, yes, theoretically, if the local authority will play nicely with the community, because those are two different words, actually, local and community. We're very lucky in Oxfordshire. We've got fantastic local authorities who have responded to community innovation rather than trying to take it over. But maintaining that partnership and that balance of power is quite hard. You have to keep watching it like a hawk all the time. So theoretically, yes, but needs to be very carefully done. And it links in with the climate emergency question. All of the local authorities in Oxfordshire, which is my patch, have declared a climate emergency. That is the districts and the county. And that's across a political spectrum. We have a Labour-run city and Conservative districts. And that means that it makes our lives a lot easier because we're talking the same language with people. And it's very interesting that those local authorities really understand that they can't do the climate emergency without involving people. And the City Council ran a really good citizens' assembly on that, which is really being taken notice of by the districts. And then the question of hydrogen, it's not a fuel, it's a vector, is the first thing, which is really important. So, hydrogen is no good if it's not renewably fueled, in my view. And I absolutely agree with Jonathan that it's about industrial processes and about transport rather than about domestic, I would say, because it's quite a dangerous thing to have in your house. If we're going to get rid of gas that kills people a lot, why put something even more explosive in somebody's house? At least it wouldn't kill you if it escaped, I suppose, but anyway. We shouldn't need to do that. Houses are much healthier for everybody if they have the minimum in them that is making the heat. So if you can design all of that into the envelope, it is going to be much better for the family living there, whether they are old, asthmatic, whatever. I live in a house, we have a heat pump and underfloor heating, and it is just delightful It is delightful. Anyone who experiences goes, how can I do that? And then we have to go, well, it's going to cost you quite a lot of money because houses are rubbish in the UK. It's not good enough. It really isn't good enough. And it isn't about energy, really, this house heating thing. It is about comfort and health, and mainly health. And I think we really need to understand that and deal with it through the health department and not through bays.
Yes, good question there. So with local authorities and solar, it can be done. I think Barbara's example is a classic good case scenario. If we think about organisations like Plymouth Energy Community, they've set up an arm's length community energy organisation that answers to the local community. Its board of directors are community representatives, and is an arm's length organisation from the council so that it can get stuff done fast. And it's proved that it can do that, and is ploughing money back into tackling fuel poverty, dealing with inequality, dealing with all the poor housing stock that we have in Plymouth, and just doing fantastic work. So absolutely is possible for local authorities to work well with community organisations, or actually become even the same thing. But there are also examples of that going disastrously wrong, where the council says, actually, it's all my land, it's not your land, we're going to do it for ourselves, and we're going to take all the profits and spend it on I don't know what. But then you've got to ask, who owns it? Who's accountable? Where's the money going? Those are the kind of key questions you need to be asking your local authority. With hydrogen, conversion factors aren't great. I think we've answered that question. Look at who is pushing hydrogen. That's an important one. And with climate emergencies, what can communities do to support the climate emergencies? In many cases, communities are leading, and they're pushing for climate emergencies. They're the people who are storming the gates, they're the people who are marching on the streets, they're the people who are turning up to the citizens' assemblies and submitting evidence. And in our patch in Devon, with the communities that I'm working with directly on climate emergency, the community energy organisations that I'm working with are providing the evidence and providing a convening role for the local authorities who are totally strapped for cash, don't have the capacity to even deal with a climate emergency, or the knowledge, quite frankly, because most of them don't have energy officers. So you've got a huge depth of a wealth of experience and knowledge within the community energy sector that, if you leverage it in the right way, can really support climate emergencies to be done in a bottom-up, people-centred way.
Thank you. That's got to be the end, I'm afraid. I'd like to thank our amazing panel. If you would like to work with these kind of people in your community, get stuck into community energy. And if it doesn't exist, find some people like that and start it. Thank you all for brilliant questions and for listening so well. And good luck over the next... We can't do zero carbon by 2050. It's got to be by 2030. 2050, we'll all have missed the bus. Good luck.